kia ora everybody, tēnā koutou e te whānau, ko te mawanga te runei tākou nā kou, ko mātou te awa, e mahi nei ahu maharahara. Nō te o Marlborough hau, kei waihara hiki aho e noho ana. Ko mākaman toko ingoa, a ki ana te whakatauki, mātariki te pōpō. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mark Unwin. It's my pleasure to welcome you here on behalf of the Marlborough District Council, Marlborough Research Centre and the New Zealand Hemp Institute of New Zealand. I've said that twice. I'm a bit put off because it's funny to do a formal introduction, because generally when my previous dealings with hemp, I've tried to remain anonymous. That was my one dad joke I said I would put in there for the audience. So thank you for laughing. It didn't really work at home this morning, so I'm pleased you're able to do that. We'll run through our presentations. We've got 4 great presentations for you today. There should be some time for questions and answers. If there's not, then the notes will be circulated. This is recorded, and we'll have the contacts for you to join or to connect with people should you want to at the end of this presentation. So it's my pleasure to welcome to the stage Gerald Hope, Chief Executive of Marlborough Research Centre, councillor, so ultimately my boss. He's going to give us a historic overview of the early days of pastoral farming here in the Wairau and I guess horticulture, what it means in terms of our changing land use. Welcome to the stage.
When you get the applause, that's the best thing you can hear, because you can then sit down. So I may as well start by sitting down. Seriously, when I was invited to actually do a presentation, I thought, well, I could really get into the detail about where Marlborough came from, particularly from 1860. But what I've done today is actually slip out some of the archival material we've got, and some of you will see these images and reflect and remember what Marlborough was. So it's a very quick flick through. The essence of what we're doing here today really is looking ahead. It's ironic that I'm actually looking behind, and I make no excuse for that. But I've always said that Marlborough has the attributes. We've grown up on this province. You know, we're from the mountains to the sea, the Maunga, the Moana. We have one of the best climates in New Zealand. I say that with a reservation after the last 59 millimetres of rain. But, you know, we're wet this year, extremely wet. And I guess we need to be mindful of the climate change. But just looking at what we have, we've got the soils, we've got the sun, we've got the water. If we use those resources wisely, they will endure, they will be sustainable. So that's the thrust of what I'm saying. Just a wee touch on why we set up the MRC, and it wasn't me. It was some of our senior members of the farming horticultural community back in 83. They realised that there was a need for science to be based in Marlborough, not carpetbaggers coming in, doing their stuff, going back to Lincoln or up to Massey or wherever they might have been from international. So their foresight really has endured, and we're coming up to 40 years and some really big things happening on this campus, but that's a story for another day. So we're funded briefly through council, through our rental streams and through our commercial vineyard. Very modest trust, charitable, non-taxable. We invest everything back into our R&D, and that benefits the wider region, which is what it's all about. Very lean machine. Susan Foster and I, we're the only ones on the payroll, but we have a big team. We've got about 80 people that work out of our campuses, and they're all highly skilled, well paid, happy in their job, go home at night exhausted, get up in the morning, can't wait to come back to work. Looking, as I said, at the last 160 years, I reflect when I go through my books at home, my reasonable collection of history. I marvel at the endurance of our pioneers. I mean, this is a wet place. We've found out again what it's like. You know, Marlborough, Blenheim, Beavertown is a wet place. And they drained it, they fenced it, they put cattle on, and they put sheep in, and they made some money, and they've moved on to grapes. Little updates like that. And over here, 30,000 hectares of grapes. I'm going to touch on that shortly. But as I said, we've got the geographic location. You know that. So looking back, if you look at, and these images I've had to compress onto one slide to cut through, high country, cattle. Top right of the screen, we've got the sales. And it was a powerhouse of farming. It's pretty much over except for forestry. You drop down, and somebody might be able to help me because we don't know the origins of these photographs. I'm not sure they're saying garlic, but it kind of looks like garlic or some such crop. Then the bottom left one there is actually our property back in 1914-18 in Middle Remick Road, between Middle and Old Remick Road. How I know it's that period from the Marlborough archives, a wee fella standing in the middle in a military uniform. So that area there was all orchard. So that's the message. It was stone fruit. And some of the trees are still there. We've got 7 plum trees that survived from that period. The rest is grapes and good on with the hills. Before my time on the research centre, that little vignette there in the middle of 1984, Montana wine. And I think it could be, I can't read it, but I think it's Gewürztraminer back in the day. But that was a fruit bowl. The science team for a field day put that together to show we had the grains, the fruits, wide range of fruit, all growing in our productive soils. Graham knows that. Paul knows that. I hate to point the finger at it, but these guys have seen and done these things. Transitioning, more crops. And the wonderful thing about Marlborough, major seed growing area. Major seed growing area. No, all gone now. And for the right reasons. The economy drives what is a profitable crop. But that was the summer I remember, as I did my seasonal chores with helping out people, flipping bags of onion seed down Hamricks Road for Ewan Robinson and people like that, drying on the fence. But we were a productive province, multi-cropping, doing lots of stuff on the land, not just one crop. And I'm not bagging grapes. We depend on, put my hand up there. I threw this one in. Some of the early trials at the MRC were garlic. And garlic we were the #1 garlic growing region, but they've been squeezed out because of lack of land. And they've had to go south, which is tragic because our garlic was tops, absolutely tops. They're still growing here, but it's not the volume we used to have. A little bit more on the garlic. I threw that in and that beautiful scene at the back there. Again, these aren't great images, but they are archival. The summer fruit sitting in the background there in blossom. The combination of crops. I'm not going to cry over the loss of crops, but I envy Nelson at times. And they've still got that diversity. I can still remember Graham out spraying apples. Clouds of spray in those days, wasn't it, Graham? The old air blast. Cherries. I didn't put this in for you, Paul, but Costessi. Just a selection. I don't know where these were taken. But looking through those landscapes there, lots of bare paddocks, trees, and a multitude of crops. But more, then we started to transition into new technology. Somebody thought, how do you keep the rain off cherries? Covers. Ask Paul about covers. One of the first to put covers over cherries. And that's still a fantastic crop for our region. Still is. Winter chilling could be a problem. These are aerial shots. Again, just showing you how the spread of cover areas started to emerge. Not sure of the date, probably the 80s. Yeah, 80s. Then we started to experiment with, the actual canopy systems, the training systems, things like that, Lincoln Canopy and all the rest of it. I vividly remember this sort of stuff being done down where we lived in Stacey's Road at the time. Trialing stuff, reflectorized material underneath the crop to try and accelerate ripening and all that. That was all new technology in the day, not so much now. Love this shot, top left, science at work. 1980s again, men in shorts and Roman sandals out there in the field doing their mahi, using science and technology. A little bit more of the landscape. This just happens to be the top right is the current research block for MRC in Rowley Crescent. That is now under 10 hectares of grapes. That was up to 30 different trials in there, from fat land trials through the blueberries. Every novel crop you could think of was conducted on that small block. No longer. Yeah, the bottom one is a shot of our original MRC on State Highway 1, just across the bridge to Picton. So there we go. We're slipping in from cropping down into the first plantings of grapes. Look at those dry hills. I have a feeling we could be looking at that this year again. Nobody knows the future and the weather. Wet, 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 bingo. Unless we're surprised. But there it is. That is the beginning. And a good old Ford tractor in the background. That is a Montana shot, has to be. The future. well, we're heading down the path of spending more on this campus. We're getting close to spending $6 to $8 million. We've designed new buildings which will accommodate more science and technical people. That's the main entrance, which will be officially opened in September. That comes in through the NMIT main entrance. So we link up there. This is the tradesman's entrance now. If you know where we are, you come through our entrance, and so be it. 39 going on 40. That's it. How's that for a warm-up? The message here is the soil, the sun, the water prevail. You can use your land better. I already know from some of the environmental reports going through council that soil carbon is being depleted. Nutrients are being depleted. We are putting in, organic and non-organic fertilizers into things. We have to look after that soil content because it gives us choices about where we go next. And the next part is the bit I'm looking forward to, what we do between the grapes. So that's it from me, Mark. Over to you.
Thank you very much. We know you've got the right person for the job where you can name everyone in the audience and talk to them about what they've grown. The only thing I can add is that I spent my time in the hot garlic suit at Marlborough Food and Wine trying to sell and promote garlic. Not a lot to add. I did forget to mention we do have 10 people online, so if we're looking down, it's because we're trying to involve them in the conversation, and so they're part of the room and we'll have questions and answers coming back from that. So thank you very much. Gerald, it's now my pleasure to welcome Richard up to the stage. I did have a look at his LinkedIn profile and it did say 25 years associate with the Hemp Industry Association. So that's quite a bit of experience that you can bring to the table. Welcome along.
Thanks very much. Yeah, that does. Time flies when you're having fun, I guess. With the observation there. But we'll touch on that a little bit in this presentation because I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of the history of hemp in New Zealand and why we are in the situation that we're in. With regard to industrial hemp. And it's quite an exciting journey. And as the other presenters will paint a picture of, and then I'll come back at the end and just outline some of the why it's important for New Zealand, why it's important for Marlborough to consider industrial hemp and the implications of an industry for local communities and regional development opportunities. So just to look at the history, back in the 90s, there was a moratorium set by the government, so we couldn't talk to the government about anything to do with cannabis. And it was a real problem for us. So when we established the association in 1997, hence this 25-odd year figure that you've come up with there, we had to raise that a level of awareness within the politicians. So we came up with a 5-minute guide, and there's a copy on the table amongst those other hemp products that are on display today. And that publication was sent to all the MPs. And we really encourage them to say, hey, look, there's a difference between what you consider cannabis is and what we're talking about, which is low THC industrial hemp and the commercial opportunities that a hemp industry could have for New Zealand. And they finally agreed. And in 2000, we started the trials. And the trials were designed to have a look at some of the implications of a hemp industry. There was a big concern that there would be diversion of the hemp plants into the illicit market. That didn't happen because it was obviously we were growing low THC industrial hemp, which doesn't have a drug content. And it's very important that we get that across to everybody because that's where we're sitting. We're staying in that lane and there's plenty of opportunities in that space. And if we jump forward nearly 20 years, so to 2021, with AgMark funding, we employed a chap, Dr. Nick Marsh, who came up with our investor report, and it just sort of paints a different picture because we can see that we've gone from a sort of a cottage industry getting started into a worldwide global industry that now really has some significant potential, and we'll touch on that potential throughout the presentations this afternoon. But it was just sort of to show where we've come from in that 20-odd year period. But if we go back to the history, and we could go all the way back millennia and talk about how hemp has been involved from the cradle of civilization and the use of fibre and all that sort of thing. But we're going to concentrate really in the last 100, 150 years. And we're going to be looking at the plant. Now, what this slide represents, there's sort of 3 genus of cannabis in the sense of what we use it for the low THC industrial hemp. You could imagine the sativa, the one on the left, long, tall, more for a fibre crop. Indica, shorter, more bushy, probably producing a little bit more seed. And those are the two big industries. From the NZHIA's point of view, it's all about the farming that underpins everything we do. And then there's the three other corners, which are the food, the fibre, and the health industry. So with regard to fibre, if we looked at a section of a stem, that cross-section represents the bast fibre on the outside, and then you've got this inner woody pith that we call the hurd or the shiv. And there's some examples of that, again, on the table, the shiv being a prime raw material for the hempcrete building process. So it's quite exciting, the amount of opportunities within the fibre. Of course, when we're talking about food, it's mainly considered around the seed and the nutritious seed. And then we've got this health industry, which incorporates the medicinal side, which we'll hear from Brian at Puro later on in one of the presentations. So there's this whole health and wellness industry that straddles the food at one end of the spectrum all the way through to the medicine at the other. And that would be more from the female parts of the plant. So you've got this health and wellness industry, which will be growing unpollinated plants. So you've got those three types of industries: the hard out fibre, the fully mature pollinated plants that would produce the seed for the food industry, and then you've got this unpollinated plants that would produce cannabinoids, terpenes, and flavonoids for that health and wellness industry. So if we jump back to history, we wanted to explain how it's been used in the sense of creating trade. And when we talk about industrial hemp, a lot of people, especially if they're a little older, would tell me about the canvas and the rope and the cordage used on boats. But the observation would be it wasn't just about those uses, because the uniforms that the sailors would be wearing, they would be made out of hemp. The oil in their lanterns, that would have been made out of hemp. All the charts, and their logs, the paper would have been made out of hemp. The original word canvas, a Dutch-derived word for cannabis. So it's really, it's really intertwined with our history. And it's just an interesting thing to sort of look at. Even on the sailing ships, there would have been barrels of hemp seed, because if they had an emergency, got marooned on an island, they'd just plant the hemp seed, create the fibre that they need to repair their sails or repair their cordage and ropes, and get back underway. And if it took a year, it took a year, but at least they had the raw materials to do that by just carrying hemp seed with them. And if they had to, they could, of course, eat the seed. If we look at the medicinal use, and again, going back into the late 1800s, early 1900s, cannabis tinctures were some of the most used medical preparations in the American pharmacopoeia up until the early 1900s. And if we look at some of the names on these slides, Eli Lilly, Park Davies, these are well-known pharmaceutical brands even today. And so it's not new for us to be using cannabis, especially in a medical way. So I just wanted to acknowledge that, because, again, these are all things that were happening over 100 years ago when we had a really good working relationship with industrial hemp and the use of cannabis in particular in a wider sense. Now, we've looked at, these sort of topics around $1 billion opportunity, and we'll get to that in a later slide when we talk about the investor report that I mentioned previously. But I just wanted to acknowledge that this isn't the first time people have talked about industrial hemp in the sense of $1 billion industry. That article in the middle is from the Popular Mechanics magazine in 1937. So this was when they had, 1938. And it's celebrating the fact that there was a German chap called George Schilling, and he had developed a mechanical process which allowed them to take the stems and split them into that long bast fibre and that hurd from the woody pith of the stem. And mechanically, that opened up a whole world of opportunity, because suddenly now we had economies of scale. You weren't relying on such a laborious sort of approach to getting it. So it was like the cotton gin was for the cotton industry. That was what this decortication system represented for the fibre industry. And the Popular Mechanics article was touting it as the next $1 billion opportunity. And everything, this is where the quote about 25,000 useful products made from industrial hemp, that was the article it came from, everything from dynamite to cellophane. So it really, again, speaks to this wide end use, the wide potential of especially the fibre in this case. The article on the left, United States Department of Agriculture Bulletin 404, that's where the quote about hemp can produce 4 times as much pulp as an acre of trees in the same growing period. That was a study that the United States Department of Agriculture did back in 1914. So it just, again, these are all examples of the fact that we've been using this product in the past. And it's, again, back in the 1900s, we were using raw materials from our agricultural byproducts to be able to produce all manner of things as a raw material for industry. So as a feedstock for industry. In this case, George W. Carver set up this whole understanding about using these primary production methods, and he called it commergy. And this is what informed Henry Ford, who's the chap on the right, and he's hitting a plastic car with a sledgehammer, and the sledgehammer is bouncing back. And this is in the 1917s. And you'll be able to, if you go online, you'll be able to look at Henry Ford's plastic car, and it'll be a 1941 version of the same car. And he was a soya farmer as well as a hemp farmer, so it could have been a combination of both of those raw materials in there. But it just speaks to the fact that they were making composite materials for things like automobiles in the early 1900s. So the question becomes sort of what happened? And this is what happened. In 1937, the Marijuana Tax Act came out. So no one knew what marijuana was, so everybody went, oh, okay, if they want to tax Mexicans smoking marijuana, fine. Doesn't affect me. So everybody had to become a producer, so they had to spend $1 and register to grow. And the only people that really sort of started to click into question were the people that were growing industrial hemp, because they weren't allowed to grow industrial hemp, because it turned out that marijuana was a Mexican slang word for cannabis. And it turns out that cannabis was industrial hemp. And suddenly these people were going, well, hold it, now I have to register, and it all became complicated. So that was the beginning of the end of commercial growth of industrial hemp for a wide range of all these uses that we just discussed, particularly in America. And around that same time, prohibition ended for alcohol. So the out-of-work people that were enforcing prohibition switched and started to demonise this new evil narcotic drug, marijuana, and it led to a whole process that is historically referred to as reefer madness. And there was actually lots of posters, lots of newsreels in the front of feature films and things like that whipped up this frenzy that became a real issue. And that's why we've lost access to industrial hemp as well as the other uses for cannabis. But it didn't always continue that way, because in 1944 it flip-flopped, because now we're in the war and all the soldiers are running out of cordage and fibre for their webbing and their uniforms and things. So now the Americans came out with a newsreel, again, running in front of the Sunday night feature. You would have watched this newsreel called Hemp for Victory, where every patriotic American farmer was encouraged to grow an acre of hemp for the war effort. And those are the soldiers protecting the seeds. And that's how strategically important it was. They needed the fibre, so suddenly it was okay to grow hemp again. And, a lot of people have heard about the Hemp for Victory side, but not many understand that it was happening also in Germany. They didn't have a movie, they had a primer, and they featured, if you can just see in the top left-hand corner there of the image on the right, a male and a female, which are these boy and girl, the male and the female parts of the plant. And they were spreading the same word, the need to grow fibre and cordage for the war effort. And, of course, after that, the war finished and it was back to being banned. And ultimately in 1961, the United Nations Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs was enacted, and that was the end of cannabis because of its use as a drug. But even they, the people of the United Nations, with all those signatories involved, understood that there was many countries that were still using low THC industrial hemp for a fibre crop locally. And so in Article 28.2, it says that this convention shall not apply to the cultivation of the cannabis plant exclusively for industrial purposes, fibre and seed, which is what we were talking about earlier, or horticultural purposes. So that's in that health and wellness sort of market, that area there. So that helped us to, give the politicians some comfort that the UN was happy to have it an industrial hemp industry. And that was an important breakthrough because it's enshrined by the UN Convention, which ultimately, after the 2000 trials began, they lasted for 5 years, and we ended up with our industrial hemp regulations 2006, which regulations have to sit under an act, and in our case, it's under the Misuse of Drugs Act because it's a health issue, because that's where marijuana or cannabis sits. But the objective of the regulations is to enable an industry. And it's a lovely closed loop because the Ministry of Health issue a license to grow low THC industrial hemp. You can only grow a certain number of approved varieties, and only industrial hemp can be made into hemp products. So we've got a well-protected little industry, and it can't be taken away from us, but it's not really, in our opinion, being that well enabled because we don't have the same political will that we had back in the day when we were doing these trials. So we are looking for that champion in the government to really move us forward, but it's all set up for us to get involved in that area. So that was just a quick sort of whistle-stop tour of the last 150 years. But it's important for people to understand that we've been using this plant a lot, right up until it was banned under this misguided notion of reefer madness. And if we then start removing that prejudice against the plant, then we can have a grown-up conversation about this low-THC industrial hemp, because we're not a drug crop. We're just an industrial, horticultural, arable crop, and that's what we want to be known for. This is just a celebration of some of the companies in New Zealand. Midland Seed, who have been growing, they were instrumental in lifting the moratorium and doing work during the trials. So they've been growing hemp for a long time. And a couple of other hemp food producers, Kanapu in the middle, Hemp Farm or Hemp NZ now, Hemp Connect and the Brothers Green. So you've got a bit of a range of geographic locations as well, 2 in the North Island and 3 in the South. Just speaking, we had Henry Ford's car, so I just wanted to sort of bring you forward a little bit. So there's a nice Lotus on the right and a Mercedes Class C, showing you that it's now being used again in that automotive industry. Now, the reason why they're doing that, because the Europeans look at an end-of-life process for all their products that they produce. So they've got to design how it's going to be disposed of. And so products that can be recycled are very popular in that space. And because it's strong and it's light, it meets their requirements as well. Now, the reason why we don't see more cars with more parts of those cars being built by and using hemp, we just don't have the infrastructure anymore. So we're still building that back up. So we've got to scale the industry up to be able to provide continuity of supply to some of these types of industries, in this case, the automotive industry. When we talk about the hemp creep, which is building healthy homes for particularly in New Zealand, that's an example of a home being partially constructed in Taranaki. And there's quite a number now in the Queenstown area that have been completely finished now. There's actually a B&B, I think, down there if you want to go and stay in a hemp house. I'd just like to put this slide in there because it's the inside cover of the 5-minute guide back in 1998. And you can just get lost in the content of this because it's starting to talk about those areas. What can you produce from that fibre, from that seed, these raw materials? Where can it go? And it's such a wide range that it's both a blessing and it's sort of a semi-curse, because where do you start? But that's the idea of this tour, and we'll get to the why of this tour in a moment. But that is just an introduction to industrial hemp to paint the picture, and I'll hand back over. Thanks.
History lesson there. Thank you very much, Richard. Now, we're fortunate in Marlborough to have Puro based here. If you know about Puro, they had the most successful and I think fastest crowdsourced fundraise in New Zealand's history. It shows a lot about the potential, I guess, for cannabis or medicinal cannabis. So we've got Brian Kindilien here, who's going to give an update on Puro. He's got a fantastic LinkedIn profile. It shows the path to get to medicinal cannabis. Cannabis is not straight. It's a windy road to get to this point, but it's great to have you here.
Thank you. No, it's really an easy business to get into. It's very cheap. So, kia ora. As Mark said, Brian Kindilien, Business Development Manager of Puro. Been with the company just over a year now, and that's a long time in our company history. I think my colleague Scott here, I think you're employee number 1 or 2. Yeah, number 2. And that's an ancient, 4 years now? Yeah. So it's this is a nascent industry in almost every definition of the word. If a professional anywhere in the world tells you they've been in cannabis for a very long time, they're probably not meaning the legal side of the cannabis business. But knowing the audience here today too, or thinking I know the audience, I'm going to focus on the harvest, the learnings from our harvest, and a little bit about Puro here. I'll cover that for a second. But on the right-hand side, Puro produces an outdoor-grown, trimmed, dried, by the way, organic, and good agricultural practice certified flower. In 2021, we harvested 2.8 tons dry of flower. This year, we harvested 5 tons. This is a remarkable achievement globally. What's remarkable about it is, I think 2021 was one of the driest and in some cases windy season that we've ever had in Kekaringa, where we grow this outdoor crop. This past year was one of the wettest and grayest. So to achieve really any outcome from this is exceptional. And I'm sure Mother Nature has a few things in store for us in the future, but this is not for the faint of heart. We're an established company. We've been around since 2018. And again, that's an incredible legacy in the cannabis world. Premium brand, world-class product, proven management. That crowdsourcing accomplishment is a demonstration of the quality of the management team in this company. They are really big thinkers, and to organize the finances, to get people to invest, individual investors to invest in cannabis is a big deal. Folks have a story behind their investments. And those stories generally are quite remarkable, and they tend to involve a grandmother or grandfather with some disease that required cannabis. And it's amazing how many people have a similar story. We are a specialist grower. This is important. We've got a couple of cultivation facilities here in the South Island, one in Waihopai to the west here, and Kekaringa is our outdoor site. I'll cover those a bit more in a minute. What's important about this is we are not what is called in the industry a seed to sale business. We are a cultivator. We're growers. We're enthusiastic farmers. I've heard a few of us say. This is really important because in my past, working in Australia and America, I observed that the companies that were most successful in the space and starting up were not the ones that grabbed the whole value chain, that tried to do everything, cultivate, process, package, distribute to pharmacies, talk to doctors about it. All of that is very expensive, very challenging to work in. Puro was the only company I saw in New Zealand and even at the time in Australia that was focused on the cultivation side of it, focused on growing, focused on genetics, and that differentiates them. It takes advantage of everything New Zealand's got to offer, that air, land, and sea and water is a remarkable value to this economy here. And Puro built its company specifically to take advantage of that. We're one of the few large-scale commercial growers in the world with organic accreditation. That's really important. There's a lot of mythology in the cannabis business, and a lot of people say we grow organic flower or whatever it might be. But you can imagine when you go to Unichem or Chemist Warehouse and you pick up your prescription for whatever it might be, you don't ask the pharmacist for the organic version of your cardiac medication, do you? Nobody in the medical industry cares a bit about organic accreditation, but we do. We do because we have a responsibility to the land, to the plant, and to the industry that we're in. And by the way, organic, we believe that organic certification can actually lower our cost of goods over time. The proof will be in the pudding, but we're pretty convinced that's going to happen. We've received some government funding recently. The Ministry of Primary Industries awarded us approximately a $30 million grant. That's a co-share in that. So about 13 million of that we'll see at Puro. And when I say we'll see that money, it doesn't mean that we'll be able to use that money for growing more cannabis necessarily. It has to be used for public good. That money from MPI and the SFFF program has to be used to lift the cultivation industry in New Zealand. And we think the organic playbook, the good agricultural practices, all of this will be a part of that playbook from that grant in the future. So keep an eye on that. There'll be opportunities for New Zealand companies to participate with us in that program. And our funding doesn't stop there. We've been supported by New Zealand Trade and Enterprise, to a large degree Callahan, a few others as well. So New Zealand is all in cannabis. And when I say cannabis, I don't just mean medical. This is industrial hemp, industrial applications. New Zealand is progressive, very progressive in this space, and I think will become more so. We believe we have a strong business model with an industry that, this is the understatement of the day, if not the week, that has high financial and regulatory barriers to entry. Boy, you can't say that enough. If you're thinking of getting into cannabis, have a chat with us. You might want to think twice. Work with somebody you trust is my advice. Get into it with a partner. Proven commercial scale outdoor harvests, and that's a remarkable accomplishment. Again, I've said that a lot, but I am impressed both with this company and with the country for accomplishing these things. Our outdoor site in Kekaringa, south of here, is a stunning place. These photographs don't really do it justice, but East Coast, Pacific Ocean aspect. If you were to walk down on the highway and look up at this site, you wouldn't see a thing. You'd see a cliff wall and a lot of trees, and that's it. You get in your drone and fly up about 200 or 300 meters. You'll see this stunning property that's been in a family farm owned for over 130 years. The McFarland family has owned that property. And what you see here in the upper right and the lower left is effectively our two key crops. In the upper right, without any shade tunneling or any tunnel house grow or any of that, is our high-grade CBD product. This is an extremely low THC, extremely high CBD. This will be has been harvested and will be milled and dried and all those things, and turned into a material that oil will be extracted from. And our great partner here in New Zealand, Helios Therapeutics in Auckland, will take much of those plants that you see there and all that flower after we've dried, processed, and all of it, and they'll turn that into a product that in about 3 to 6 weeks, you can go to your doctor and your pharmacist, and you'll be able to buy that first time New Zealand grown, organic, GACP certified material in Helios's 30 ml bottles from your pharmacist with your doctor's prescription. So if you go to a company like the Cannabis Clinic, for example, a lot of people seem to like that business. You go to Cannabis Clinic with a doctor's script or get one from them, look on their dispensary page, you'll see Helios Therapeutics, a dozen other products. That Helios one that'll be on market in a few weeks will be the first one grown and produced entirely in New Zealand. And we're hoping that that price eventually reflects that. So that's a huge accomplishment as well. And that's a benefit to all of our society around us. We're currently growing in a little bit more than 10 hectares outdoor cultivation. Again, not just organic, but we're certified organic. I keep saying that because so many companies out there flog organic flowers and this and that. We have to not only qualify for that certification, but we have to maintain it really, really carefully. And a lot of big decisions are made around that. We are a good agricultural practice, GACP certified as well. This is critical because the value chain moves from those beautiful bushes and flowers to a very industrial manufacturing setting where drying, milling, bagging, all of that sort of occurs. Then that material goes to a company that is qualified for a good manufacturing process, GMP. A GMP provider in New Zealand or offshore has to take that flower, what we call starter material or biomass, and they have to produce it. They have to do the extractions. They have to crush it and do all sorts of interesting chemistry to it to get those 30 ml tincture bottles out of it. So that requires a manufacturing process, which is also certified and very, very expensive. Helios is one of 2 GMP manufacturers in New Zealand. There are about a dozen in Australia at the moment. So you can see this is going to elevate some companies in the future. That GMP process is incredibly expensive, incredibly difficult to manage the process around all those things. Yet another benefit for Puro in the space. That's not what we do yet. We grow it. We grow it really well. We figure out the genetics. We get the best genetics we can grow in New Zealand, and we grow them incredibly effectively. And we reduce that cost of goods to Helios, to the pharmacy, to the patient. That is our objective. What we produce is high potency CBD. CBG, if you haven't heard of that one, is another cannabinoid that does some really interesting things. I can't speak to any of the clinical benefits of these things, but CBD, CBG, and some unique things. We've had some really interesting CBD to THC blends, some mixtures. We've had some sort of Frankenstein-y things that have incredible readings that we're not quite sure what to do with. So universities and others get some of that material and tell us what's interesting about that. We produce those premium manicured flowers and or milled biomass. So I'll show you a couple pictures of that too. But before I move on from the photos here, the lower left is an indoor protected cropping crop as well. So we're experimenting with, we had that incredibly hot, dry season. We had that incredibly wet season. Does a balance of full outdoor or protected cropping work? The facilities that you see here, the sort of white and the green building to the left of that black shed are those protected cropping sites. That shed is, we believe, the Southern Hemisphere's largest drying facility. And the picture doesn't do it justice, but when you're in there, it's a cavernous space that's divided out for the sort of pre-GMP process that we go through. We have curtain drying capabilities, where you'll see some photos of that later. We have that conveyor drying system that operates. We have trimming machines in there, and we have a lot of people in white suits and gloves and masks. It's impressive. This is our indoor site, Waihopa, just up the road here. And Kirsty will know certainly the area of this. It's this beautiful viticulture region in Waihopa, right across from those, what used to be those stunning big white globes that the US government put in there many years ago to protect us from something. And those globes are now gone, but the site is still there. That's the Five Eyes listening station in New Zealand. We're right across the street from that, and it's a fantastic location because it's nothing but grapes around you, and beautiful site. And in the middle of all of this is this little indoor cannabis research and development facility of Puro's. And just up the road a little bit is Kirsty's site, where that hemp is growing between the vines. So things are shifting in this area. And when I think Scott could talk to this perhaps later, but I think when they were doing the consents for this site, a lot of the vineyard owners came to sort of kick the tires on us and see what this was all about. Was there an opportunity for them to diversify? Who knows? Maybe. So this is the home of Puro's indoor, what we call a controlled environment agriculture setting, so a CEA facility. We research things here, we test things, we grow our mother plants. Mother plants are the key to planting little babies out in the field that you saw in the previous slides. And these technicians that you see in the photos here, these are the core workforce of Puro, these young men and women who they grew up without the prohibition stigma. They grew up without thinking cannabis was some evil narcotic with the reefer madness references. They grew up seeing it as a scientific evolution, and we need to study this. And there are fantastic young people who work in our company. Here we grow high potency, sort of high rated THC, CBD, and then 1-to-1 cultivars, so CBD to THC balance. Again, if you go to the cannabis clinic and you look for your products there and your doctor recommends a 1-to-1 thing, well, that's a CBD to THC extract and oil. That can be incredibly effective because it's a small amount of both things, but it can treat apparently a large number of disorders and pain and all sorts of interesting things according to doctors. And here as well, we produce premium manicured flowers, trim, a lot of those big leaves that you see hanging off there that we would call those trim, and the biomass, those flowers that could then be milled and dried and all of that and produced for extracts and pills and edibles and apparently tea too. I just put this slide up very quickly. If you were thinking of getting into the cannabis business, medical cannabis business, yeah, look at this slide really carefully. Ask me for a copy afterwards, because these are just a few of the many licenses and the process around licensing that you'll have to go through. On the top there's our certified organic. You could choose not to do that. There's our control union GACP certificate. You could choose not to do that if you like. The rest of these you can't get around. You've got to pay to play in this space. And what's interesting here for Puro, I think, is that we didn't look at this as onerous and we didn't look at this as challenging. We looked at it as something I think that we definitely needed to understand and get our heads around. And it started the phrase that I heard from my first day there, that we don't just grow cannabis, we grow paperwork. That's what this stuff is all about. But it's really important. I make fun of it, I tease and all that, but this is the difference between going to your doctor and getting a safe prescribed medication that you will absolutely get some results from and be safe, as opposed to going perhaps down the street corner and doing something else. That's the difference. It's the licensing scheme. The regulators pay attention to this stuff, and it's really, really important. It's keeping our society safe. So a few slides on our harvest this year. This is from around Easter time this year. And I had I spent a day out there, and my body took about a week to recover from the process. You see these folks out here. We have the advantage of taking some of the viticulture industry's workforce at the end of their picking season and applying them down at our site for harvesting. So they do trimming, they do some bucking, and they do the picking of the flower for us. And I spent about 3 hours picking one row of what you see here. These folks from the Pacific Islands went through like a herd of locusts and did an amazing job. That that balance that folks like Scott are responsible for, finding the workforce at the right time, finding opportunities to bring that workforce in, sharing and offsetting the costs with the viticulture industry. So if we had to bring them in from outside, we probably couldn't afford the cost of goods of that product. But because they're already here in Marlborough, we use them. And if we can stagger our cultivation by a couple of weeks and have advantage with that workforce, Puro is doing something exceptionally well there. The benefits of achieving consistency and repeatability in growing a natural pharmaceutical ingredient outdoors, it comes down to a couple of things: cost, reduced cost, and scalability. The McFarland family farm at Winterholm is a big place. We're growing just over 10 hectares. We can probably double that if the demand globally is there for our flower. Reducing that cost is key. Challenges? Well, I should put nature first, but I just kind of want to slide it in there and say, oh yeah, typhoons, earthquakes, things like that can really stuff up a harvest. The challenges, though, the biggest one, and I kid you not, is consistency. Getting that active pharmaceutical ingredient to a consistent number, batch after batch, across all that paddock, getting it to a consistent number year after year, really, really key. Again, not for the faint of heart. Compliance goes back to that licensing process. Are we complying with government? Are we following the license requirements perfectly? We spend an awful lot of time thinking about that before we grow or sell anything. Standardization is a big thing for us too. This is inside our processing facility in Kettering. These are some flowers that you see here, kind of a traditional looking, they look like buds, they look beautiful, they're bright green. They've gone through our trimming system, they're put on trays, they're going to go for some extra drying, and then they'll be packaged. The consistency of that flower, even though it's a pharmaceutical product, the demand in terms of the life cycle of cannabis is that when a country like New Zealand opens up a medical cannabis scheme, oils, tinctures, pills are the first thing doctors feel comfortable prescribing because they can control the volume that you consume. They can watch for addiction traits and things like that in their prescribing. But the evolution says that oils start to decline after about 3 years on a market. And if we look at Australia, the UK, parts of the US, we can see that play out. It's kind of an advantage for New Zealand coming into this a little later than other countries. We can look into the future and see what happens and not make the same mistakes. We do make the same mistakes too, but we try not to. So all of that is by way of saying the look of the flower, even for a prescription product, is critical. I jokingly mentioned there's a tea on the market here. It comes from Australia. It comes in little jars. It's beautiful looking. You pop it open, you get your instructions to make tea, and you may as well buy a vaporizer with it too, because that's what people are going to do with it. But those flowers are a medical product prescribed by your doctor, and they give you a dose. No more than one flower per 24-hour period, that kind of thing. And patients will go to their local clinic someday and they'll buy that flower based on its look. That's a weird thing for a pharmaceutical prescription, but that's the trend. And in the medical space, they call this MEC-Rec or MedRec. So medical recreational use. So people with prescriptions from their doctors who actually just like cannabis an awful lot for a lot of other reasons follow the flower trends, and that's what they're kind of after. Very strange space to be in as a product. Our drying processes that we go through, trimming, milling, packaging, and testing. This takes a lot of time. So when I was done in the field on Easter, I went inside and I got exposed to the packaging side of it. I still have nightmares about that. It is an incredible job because there's no standard process for doing this. It's not like any other pharmaceutical material. So our team, really bright people, are learning as they develop these processes. But the last one in there, cleaning. I never imagined how important cleaning was to the process. But when you're dealing with a medical product, the machine might run for 10, 20 hours during the harvest cycle via a conveyor system. But then 1 or 2 people have to go in there and clean every surface of that while it goes into its shutdown cycle and is started up again the next day. Completely cleaned. That's an amazing thing. So again, you think you get in cannabis, get a lot of rubber gloves. You're going to need them. Then the final thing we're always doing is looking for efficiencies. Again, driving that cost of goods down, optimizing the process. what's the best way to get the maximum throughput on the equipment? What's the best way to test and record the measurements of the testing? Modeling and simulation, what was relegated to an engineering industrial environment 10 years ago, is being brought into the agricultural space now. We've got Lincoln University and a couple of others are talking to us about computational modeling around our processing steps. So really interesting opportunities there to drive efficiencies. These are those curtain drying part of our facility, and on the right-hand side is our trimmer. So kind of a neat space age looking sort of thing, but at the end of the day, it's a really high-tech piece of kit. The environment of harvesting is really key. The risks and rewards of outdoor grow, I covered a bit of that. The difference between the types of plants is also something I never imagined as I came into the industry. The selection of those cultivars is really key. In Australia, I was told just a few days ago by a very large company there that in Australia, virtually every grower in the country is growing the same 3 cultivars. 2 of them are Dutch, one of them is a North American strain. Now, many of you in the viticulture industry and surrounded by it know what keeps vintners, I imagine, up at night would be the risk of disease. And if you have the same cultivar across an entire country, wow, that is a big, big risk for a very expensive crop. In New Zealand, it's a little better story because, again, we've sat from a position in the past and looked into the future, looked across the ditch and said, no, it doesn't quite, we don't want to make that mistake. Really, really important. Inputs like fertigation, soil conditions. Cannabis does not like wet feet, I heard last night. Does not like wet feet at all. So you've got to have boots in the field, boots in the paddock monitoring that. You've got to have a really effective fertigation system, and you've got to be prepared to change if you need to. Plant management, trimming strategies, canopy exposure. If I'm growing a high-grade THC flower for direct consumption, meaning somebody can vape it or turn it into a tea, they're going to want the look and feel of those buds on the right-hand side to be top-notch. I might grow that in a canopy setting as opposed to a bushy sort of thing that my CBD flower might be processed into because it's going to be milled and extracted. Nobody will ever see the flower. Those decisions are really key. Technology, the amount of time and technology we put into weather monitoring, it's not looking at your phone and figuring out how many mils you're going to get today. It's more like looking out the next 3 days, 10 days. What do we have to do to adapt to those weather conditions, and making sure we get that information right is key. Test equipment, fertigation, these are expenses upon expenses upon expenses. If you're not prepared to deal with them, you're putting your crops and your profit at risk. Finally, the last sort of step in this process, aside from delivering it to our customer, is bagging it. And these are not your mom and dad's Ziploc baggies. These are the one on the right is a 25 kilo Mylar bag. It gets nitrogen purged with the milled flour inside, and it's sealed 2 or 3 different ways and then put in those drums to protect it even further. The reason for this, again, is it's a medical product. If it's exposed to air at the wrong time, we introduce mold, microbes, all kinds of interesting things that a medical product cannot have. And our customer will reject it if they see holes punched in a bag. So the investment in packaging and labeling and monitoring the process is incredible. And we're a large volume grower, so we supply for that large volume demand. We do quite a bit of small batch cultivation. Much of it is for test and evaluation, knowing what works in our environment, what doesn't. Again, mitigating that risk of having only 3 cultivars that we're growing in an entire country. That may be an exaggeration, but it's probably close to the truth. That labor impact I mentioned with the seasonal workers from the viticulture industry, boy, if you can find a region like this, I can't think of a better place to grow it. I hear people growing it in Queensland, in Fiji, and Jamaica. Boy, they have huge risks there. Yes, it's a low cost of goods market for labor, but you have a lot of other huge risks. Growing it in humid climates introduces mold and more challenging things. Overlapping with the existing industry in a region is really, really key. I did this presentation, a version of this slide in Australia a few weeks ago, and somebody said, where do I find these workers? Because in Australia, it's a lot harder to get seasonal workers in, and it's a political challenge there. A Labor government comes in and they want to sort of lock down the influx of foreign offshore workers. As a Liberal government comes into Australia and things shift again, it just drives them nuts over there. We don't have that risk here. There's a bit of politicization around it, but not nearly as bad. This is just a slide to kind of give you a sense of what it is we sell to our customers like Helios Therapeutics. There's a list of products on the left-hand side, just names that we come up with. There's that active pharmaceutical ingredient in the middle column. So a CBD is considered sort of a high grade when it sits around 6 to 12%. There are CBD products that can go up to 12 to 20%, although I think there's more of a mythology around that, but it does happen. Why that's important is if Helios is going to be taking our 2 tons of material and turning it into a CBD extract, there's a ratio. About 2 tons of that material will produce about, I don't know what the ratio is, but a much smaller amount of those 30 mil extract bottles. And the potency is key to getting that active pharmaceutical ingredient. Either have to throw more biomass at it, or you have to get the potencies up. So that's another one of those balancing acts that we achieve. And the holy grail in the THC world is this high-grade THC product in the very bottom, Puro Can C30. It sits in that 25 to 27%. This also is a bit of mythology around it. Can you achieve a flower with 25 to 27% THC? Maybe. I'll let you know in about 6 weeks when we have our first harvest out of a small-scale crop at Waihopai. So it's globally, if I were to say to the world today, Puro New Zealand has a small batch, 10 kilos of a 27% potency THC flower. It would be gone by the end of the day. It could be in Germany, UK, wherever. The demand globally for that kind of product is astounding. And all of that is by way of saying, gosh, this ain't easy. But it's also not impossible. It's an incredible journey to work with the team at Puro, to see all the advantages that New Zealand has in this space, and then to see it actually happening. This is an example from last year's harvest of that curtain drying. And I'll leave you with this. The curtain dry is really interesting. When people talk about full spectrum cannabinoid products, that's how you get them. You grow them. You grow the best cultivars you can get in that space. You treat them like they're your little children, and you hang them up on the wall to dry. And then you lovingly pluck those flowers off, package them, and you've got a product. But thank you very, very much for your time today. Thank you, Mark and Richard, for inviting Puro to come out here today. And I'm happy to answer any questions after the presentations.
Thanks, Brian. It was a fascinating look into what Puro is doing. We're really fortunate to have Puro here, and I think everyone in the region could benefit, I guess, from talking to Puro and going through what the learnings have gone through. So thank you very much for your time. And we've got coming up Kirsty Harkness, who I understand is the first licensed grower in New Zealand of hemp. Is that correct?
In vineyards.
In vineyards. Oh, that was a nice little piece in terms of what you're doing. So welcome up.
I want to take a pump of this and pass it around. It's a body oil. Lovely. Hi. If you got lost in a lot of the detail that's come before, just Richard talked about industrial hemp, which is seed, fibre and wellness and health. And then Brian's talked about medicinal cannabis. So same family of plants, but very different applications. Think about growing Sauvignon Blanc here in Blenheim or growing some Pinot Noir. You obviously treat it completely differently. So for myself, how do I get this talk up?
You go next. You go next.
Next. Oh, look at that.
Your rules.
Wonderful. So the journey for me, I started managing 68 hectares of vineyard in Marlborough in 2009 and was very interested in the health of the soils. So I popped along here to NMIT and I started doing some papers on soil health. Absolutely fascinating. Highly recommend it if you haven't done it. And then I started looking at cover crops in the vineyards. I started planting things like buckwheat, phacelia, clovers, all stuff that I'm sure if you're in the vineyard industry, you're already playing with. And my little business mind started thinking, is there a crop I can plant where I actually will make some revenue back? I was watching people doing things like saffron, lucerne, there's different people you talk to. So then I watched a country calendar and they were talking about hemp. So for me, we approached three wine companies to say, hey, can we trial this? Can we plant some hemp down the rows and see how it goes? And of course, they wanted to know whether it would impact the vines, because we already have a high value crop here in Marlborough, and we didn't want to put that at a disadvantage. So I embarked on the research. I jumped on a plane and went up to Canada, and they have a long history of growing industrial hemp. This is a compulty crop, and you can see that I'm tiny there, but this is what they're doing for the fibre industry. I looked at, this is a cedar. You can see me sitting there. Now, this cedar actually folds out to 4 times that size, and these guys will drive all day one direction and then turn around and come back the next direction. We're talking the plains of Manitoba. They're massive. So completely different to what we're doing down here. But I was able to look at a whole lot of different hemp varieties up there and look at ones that weren't going to be tall growers for shading the grapes, because obviously we want the sun exposure, we want the air exposure on the grapes. So we got a local gentleman, you probably know him, called Mark Krasnow, who's a scientist, doctor of plant physiology, involved, and he embarked on 3 years worth of research. So he's actually in the States, so I will present some of his research today. And this is some of the planting out. There were 7 different cultivars in the trials, in 3 different vineyards around Marlborough. And it actually turned out that first one that I showed you, the compulty, was the ideal grower in the vineyard, because the vines, the plants you saw was so tall, but that's because they got sun all day long. Whereas with the vine shading, they're actually only getting 2 hours of sun, so they went to perfect height. Whereas the ones where we saw the crops in open sunlight would grow to this height, in the vines, they were right down here. So that's process of elimination. Over 3 years, we found that compulty was a really good grower in the vineyards. You can see from baby plants, this is just a couple of months. The planting here is November through to March. So it doesn't interfere with the crop. And again, this is all to do with Mark's research paper, which is going to be published later this year. But we found that if you did it, if you planted it every couple of rows, you got the aeration, you were able to drive sprayers and all the vineyard gear. It grew in the compacted tyre tracks, and it didn't care if you drove over it. So there was no point trying a crimp roller on it, because it just popped back up. So we've got video footage of just driving down rows with plants as high as on the left. They just ping down, ping back up. It's like you've never been there. It wouldn't make a horror movie where it's all compressed, where you've run through the fields. So again, Mark's research, I'm actually going to skip through some of these slides and then read you some of the 3-year paper he's just released, or he's just sent me. It's like a draft, but the bees were coming back heavily laden with pollen. He talks a lot about that in the paper. He did research on the grapes, and Auckland University pitched in at this point and sent a PhD student, and they've actually just come back to me to say they've had very exciting findings on, they said that there was a massive difference in bacterial and fungal properties in the grapes grown in the hemp area as opposed to the non-hemp area, and they're interested to do some more research there as well. Oh, a little video to play. Again, this is some of the research the guys are doing out in the field. So hemp is a hollow fibre, as you've seen from some of Richard's pictures, and it holds 4 times its body weight in water, and it works as an insulator. So the idea of the trials as well was not to take the plant out of the vineyards, as Richard's talked about, for the fibre, because we already have these high-value crops. The idea was to look to harvest the hemp once we'd finished the research, harvest the heads, and use the actual plant matter to put mulch back into the vineyards and therefore continue to improve organic matter. It's carbon sequestering. It's all positive goodness for the vineyards. They've done research on its taproot that goes straight down, so it doesn't go out like typical cover crops. You obviously don't want competition with the vines. You don't want competition with the vigor or the nutrients. So hemp did not impact canopy development, nutrition, water relations, berry yield, or berry development. It positively affected the vineyard biodiversity. the honeybee hives, the organic soil matter, the yeast diversity, and according to one of the winemakers who did a 20,000 litre trial of complete wild ferment, the wine quality was positive. For myself, at the same time as that Mark was doing these trials in these vineyards with the hemp, I was getting allergy reactions to synthetic soaps. And so I got some hemp oil, which is being passed around, and I tried to put it on my skin. In the sunshine, it just goes rancid and it smells absolutely terrible. So I then went to some specialist oil blenders and said to them, how can we fix this? We spent 18 months and we got the perfect blend, which is actually our face oil, which sits in a beautiful cannabis leaf, because with consumables, you're not allowed to put the picture of a cannabis plant on the packaging, but skincare has no rules. So we went overboard and we celebrated the plant, because it really is a plant that is good for people and planet. So we made the face oil, which was the first launch, the body oil, which you're passing around. I've got a cleansing oil there as well. They've all won international awards. We're the first luxury in that quality premium space for hemp products in New Zealand. We've just released a day and a night cream this month, which are very exciting products, and we've got more products coming. So we've got a team in Auckland, offices in Kingsland, 10,000 stock on shelf. We just got into Unichem, and we've just been approached by some other big retailers here in New Zealand. So it's all positive, because people have been scared of hemp in the past. Now, these hemp seeds that we're using, here's the packaging. It's obviously here in person, but the hemp seed we're using at the moment, we're harvesting up in Hawke's Bay and in Wanganui. But we think that Marlborough is a wonderful area for hemp in the future. The hemp seed would have to prove itself. Like there are harvesters that are skinny enough to go down our road, and you could just harvest the seed. We see a higher premium market here in the future, but as Richard alluded to at the beginning, the government does need to do some work on that front. So instead of sitting around and waiting for the government to change their minds on a few things, we've decided to go full steam into what's legal and what we currently can do. So the stuff we grow is very different to what Brian grows. You would die from smoke inhalation before you actually got a high if you tried to smoke our plants. So talking about the product more, just as I say, product development has been really exciting. We have, with the new products, we have now got a company called Ocean Derm X, which is another New Zealand family who have specialised they've spent 10 years doing scientific research on the goodness of New Zealand botanicals. So the kawas, the black fern, red seaweed, and then there's green tea, there's all these good things, and we're putting those products into our products now as well, just to try and push New Zealand's botanicals on the world stage. So where to for the future of Blenheim with hemp? The way we see it is with the research that's been done, and we can, and with it proving that it's not a disadvantage to the grapes, it's up to each person to start innovating and thinking, what can they do with this? How can they push the boundaries? We don't have all the, we do have to have a license and buy the seed, but I can help you with that. It's nothing like what Brian's had to do. There's a few rules, like you can't be within 5 kilometres of a school or a township. You're not allowed to be visible from a road. I think it's more the fear that people might jump the fence and try and harvest it and pretend it's something else. There has been in Auckland episodes of them selling it on the high street, which obviously it looks the same and it smells the same. It just doesn't do anything. So when you go up to the places like Canada and around the world, there's lots of advancements out in the field with the fibre crops. So the machinery is all there. It's a matter of nailing down what you want to harvest from a vineyard scale. As I said, for myself, it will be the heads and the seeds, and the rest of it is useful for me in the vineyards in Marlborough to make into a mulch. With the research that I'd like to just share a little bit with you from Mark. So this will be, as I say, released later in the year, but just little snippets. So the results of this 3-year study show that hemp is a viable cover crop for New Zealand vineyards. The presence of hemp in the vineyards provides a means of alleviating soil compaction, addition of organic matter to the soil without negatively affecting the vines, and the potential second income stream for the grower. Even if you just did it for your soil health, there's from the 40 to 80 centimetre, there's increased organic matter. And Kraz believes this is because the other cover crops are never getting that deep. But of course, they're then creating tap roots, they're creating organic pathways down, they're bringing nutrients up to make them more viable for the vines as well. The only thing we found as a negative is a slight decrease in magnesium on the vine petioles, but we can do magnesium. We do fertigation on some of our vineyards. I'm sure you guys have those things when you do hard ferts. And he believes that this is also because those cover crops weren't getting that deep before, so they weren't taking that magnesium. So they weren't competing with that one nutrient with the vines. As long as your vineyard is irrigated, it's not competing with the water. There was no crop difference. In fact, the crop in the hemp area was heavier. Hemp can carry some diseases like rot, but not the same varieties as we have in the grapes. So we haven't seen any rot. We haven't seen any bird peck, interestingly. We thought the birds would all come flocking for the seed, which they did, but they didn't touch the grapes. They only were interested in the hemp seed, so that was okay, because we did try with a bit of lead, but it didn't seem to worry it, so that was good. As I say, we will release this because this is really exciting stuff. We've got a whole lot of stuff on soil analysis, and I'm just going to read the conclusion to you. So from the third season of this study, hemp appears to be a viable cover crop for use in vineyards. The poor strike in 2021, you all know we had drought, is clear that the planting method is extremely important to get it right for the crop to grow well. So in those years, the hemp was planted a bit later. So last year, they found that if they went a bit earlier with it, the November rains, it got a better head start. As long as it can get its taproot down into that second, you know how the top soils here are very alluvial and they don't retain the water quite so well. As long as it can get its taproot down before the summer dries out, then it sustained itself with hydration. Even so, the planting time is very important, even if there's plenty of soil moisture when actually sowing. The hemp was properly planted and grew well in the 21 to 22 season. The hemp plants did not noticeably affect the vine growth, nutrition, water relations, fruit development, vine productivity, mirroring the other years. The soils from the hemp area had an increased organic matter at the depth of 40 to 80, like we've talked about, showing that using hemp as a cover crop is a viable way to add organic matter deeper into the soil profile than most cover crops or natural mid-row swards. This organic matter is all beneficial to the health structure, the fertility of the soils in the long term, and it sequesters atmospheric carbon dioxide. The findings that hemp plants in the vineyard did not negatively affect the vines but beneficially affected the soils is very exciting and deserves further study. The findings from the vintage of 2019 wine from the hemp treatment were a higher quality according to the winemaker and also deserves further investigation. So that's pretty positive for us for 3 years worth of study. We had 54 hectares planted, just to give you the details there, and happy to answer any questions. It's just been a fun journey for us. Are we going to answer questions now, or
every row or every second? What will you?
Every third seemed to work better. Yeah, but it depends on the vineyard. It depends. Clay soils are going to do better. The hemp doesn't like wet feet, but neither do vines. The hemp likes high sunshine hours, so do vines. I mean, we've got the perfect growing region here, as we've already proved with our Sauvignon Blanc. So,
were you doing some blocks without the hemp and some with?
Correct.
To change your tonnages?
No change in tonnage. The heavy hemp area was higher tonnage. Yeah, and we trialled it in a young vine area, and it was higher again, probably because the young vine, so the fruit was higher. We felt it was because the young vines were protected because the hemp got taller. And when the November winds and everything came through, there was no drying out. There was no vine damage. You know how often you break your tendrils and your head ties and all that, but we didn't have any damage in that area, so it grew very well. And would have been a lot warmer for it.
5 kilometres from the school cuts out almost all of the plains because you've got Turmarina, you've got Renwick, you've got Riverlands, so you can only effectively grow it in the North Bank. You've also, is there a school of Warragully? I'm guessing there is.
I think when it comes to the Ministry of Health with those kinds of things, it's a matter of discussion. When I first applied for my hemp licence, I was rejected because I apparently used the word. Apparently, I said I would love to investigate medicinal one day in my application. I didn't know, did I? I was just, a grower trying to look at other crops I could investigate. And that's how I met Richard, because I got in touch with the hemp industry and they were very, very helpful. So I recommend, if you're interested in this, contacting the hemp board. And when I went back to the Ministry of Health, I started a new application, put in all the information that Richard told me to. And I break a couple of the criteria, but they don't seem to care that, I put in you have to, no, sorry, I shouldn't say it's ridiculous. Don't repeat me if anyone's, but you have to have a seed register. It's like, I used to be a nurse and when we used to have to sign out controlled drugs, it's the same with hemp seed, but I suppose it stops anyone else going and growing it in their backyard because it looks exactly the same and the police wouldn't know what they were dealing with. But the police obviously know where our growing plots are. They're all behind it. They often greet me as their biggest hemp grower in the region, but just all a bit of fun. But look, some of those rules, I would say it's all about negotiation with MOH.
The other one was just, we're growing grapes in Marlborough, but more than that, we're growing Sauvignon Blanc, and more than that, we're growing Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc.
Correct.
It means that the market is as big as this province only, as far as the growing side. We're competing with hemp on a world market. Is there any, obviously the question is there any uniqueness to a Marlborough brand, to any of the levels of hemp growing? It's got THC or something in it that's so much better than anywhere else that we can brand it in the early stages of the industry.
I would say the answer is that we're still working on that. I'm a businesswoman and I have lots of ideas, but of course I don't have them all. That takes an industry to grow and develop. When it comes to the Sauvignon Blanc, I suppose for us, number one, it's about making our vineyards healthier. So there's biodiversity. It's not a monoculture. And that to me was first and foremost, aside from making any extra money. Number two is if you have got all that, we, in the vineyards that I'm managing, we have 260 kilometres of mid-row space. That's just compacted from tyre marks from the harvesters in the mid-row and the tractors on the outside. So for us to be able to break up compacting soil, to add organic pathways, one of the blocks we never even used to be able to grow a weed or find a worm. And now, honestly, you wouldn't recognise it. It's just such a healthy vineyard. It's that, as I said to you before, from a financial point of view, you already own the land. You already have all the tractor gear. You've already broken those barriers to market that a lot of these people that are in a town, they don't have the land, they don't have all the massive gear. You've got it all. It wouldn't take much to create a harvester. I look at my trimmer and I think about, okay, well, you could just adjust your trimming blades and put a conveyor belt and a little hopper under it, and all of a sudden you've trimmed your heads off. You've captured those. But again, for us, it was about research first, because I'm not a run headstrong in. I don't have Sank McFarlane leaning on the gates of security to make sure that no one comes into the properties. No, but we obviously already had that high value crop with the grapes. So it's, you could have someone else and they want to harvest the entire plant, because that to them, the root in the ground with the organic matter is enough to be left. Brian talked about CBN and CBG. Well, they're in the roots as well. So if you want to talk about the plant, there's money to be made from the entire plant. It depends really whether you want to strip all that out of your land or whether you want to give back to your grapes, as well as creating profit off parts of it. I don't have the answers to the profits off parts of it yet. Obviously, I've got hemp seed oil and we're taking this to the world. So we would love to say that that's Marlborough hemp seed oil, hemp heart oil we've got. So instead of the farmer's market type of hemp oil that you've always known as a green oily residue, this is just the tiny little heart in the centre of the seed, cold pressed, with the only machine of its kind up in Levin, of all places. We would love to say that that's Marlborough hemp heart oil, but at this stage, the other thing we've just done is residue testing, because of course we use sprays. So hemp can be grown organically, no problems at all. So the mid-row plants that we put in on this research just look after themselves. But the residues from the sprays, we test the grapes. So we just got all the testing back, and so we'll examine that to see whether there's any residue here as well. But does that answer your question in a very long way? Almost. Well, what part did I miss?
I think you covered it. It's just whether we can brand Marlborough hemp products, and the earlier you do it, the better, because once you get down the track, it's really hard to double back and claim it. We need a uniqueness that they can't show in, out of New Zealand for a starter, and Wanganui, or Dunedin.
Yeah, well, I'm actually on the hemp board as well, and we've been looking at the story of Zespri, the story of Manuka, not just the honey, because that's obviously not gone as well as they had hoped, but the Manuka story with the tea tree, those kinds of stories, and looking at how, because the problem with hemp is it's got a bad reputation. People think of it as something that they can get stoned on, even though they can't. It's banned, social media advertising, anything like that, because people cottoned on to the fact that if they can't use the word cannabis, they can use the word hemp and try and advertise. So Facebook and Instagram just outright banned that kind of advertising. So they're all still areas that need a bit of work, but I understand where you're coming from, because we've talked about that if we can come up with a brand for this hemp seed oil or hemp in general, and from this region or even from New Zealand, then we've got something to take to the world. So, and I wouldn't be shy to say that even if Marlborough did have a specific uniqueness there, New Zealand's small enough that if we band together for New Zealand, I think that on the world stage we could have a really cool product, because we do it very differently down here. I mean, China's a mass producer of hemp, but they don't have the pure New Zealand image that we've got down here. So, yeah. Good.
Do you have the 3 vineyards organic?
No.
Do you think that that's a potential benefit, that the hemp might help vineyards to progress to an organic?
I couldn't answer it because I'm not an organic grower. However, I've just been approached by a well-known organic vineyard to look at doing research in their vineyard. They want to do the research.
Biodynamics even.
Yes, they're biodynamic. And they talked about there being organic, biodynamic, and then hemp as another step altogether. They talked about that their biggest concern was devigoring the vines, because they already have that issue with organic growing, but they were excited by Mark's research that it's showing that in an irrigated vineyard it hasn't done that, but hasn't been done in an organic area. Yeah, but it's all just in early days of research. So, and you don't know until you give it a shot, right? So,
one more question: do you alternate the rows that you grow annually, and what you use as cover crops in the other rows? Natural sward.
Yeah, so what the research has been doing is not just doing hemp seed. There's a mix. There's a Facilia, the clover. Clover swards really well with hemp because of the nitrogen fixing and because it's quite low. Hemp will outrun. I mean, you've got all the other weeds that we know, the mallows and everything that we all love in the vineyards, but they can't grow as high as fast as hemp, so it outshades them, outruns them. So you don't. Those rows you've seen, they don't get any treatment. You do. We're not organic. Some of those vineyards will only do one Roundup spray in a season and then one buster later in the season. So they'll do that Roundup spray before they put the hemp in, and then nothing else is needed to be done. So there's no mowing you're cutting down on, all your diesel costs you're cutting down on your movement across the land. However, depending on your vineyard, so if you've got a beautiful soft clay soil that looks like a bowling green, and you use a direct seed drill, you would have a lot nicer time of it post, whereas if you've got some of the vineyards that are very rocky, will drag up the stones and then they need to be rolled. Or there was one vineyard that was very rocky, so we put a harrow on the back behind the seed drill, and that seemed to just settle or push things under row. So that seemed to help. But I mean, it grows so well in those conditions, but it grows really well in the clays, obviously. So, yeah. Good.
All right.
All right.
Thank you very much. Never been in a thing where we all smell so good. Richard, you're going to come in and talk a little bit more about the investment in terms of what's required for hemp, and then we may well have some time for some questions. I see there's one online.
Okay, well, I'll come back to that one then after. So for the online viewer, we do have one question waiting, but it's probably for Kirsty. So I'll get through a little bit more hemp information, and then we'll go back to the questions at hand. It's very interesting, the questions that you had about regional differences and things like that, and we'll touch on that in part of the presentation I'm about to do, because it's an important part. And you've seen what's happened in the European trade deal with feta and these other types of words, these geographic indicators. As we'll say it out loud because people are starting to understand what it means now, and they are valuable trademarks for regions to use, and that's something of interest for the Economic Development Agency, I'm sure, as well. But so why hemp? It's clearly we're enthusiastic about hemp, and people like Kirsty are moving the whole industry forward and showing the business opportunities, and they're just starting in this space, and it's just an incredible rotational crop. As Kirsty was saying, grown over the summer, similar to maize. It's just there for us to really get involved with. But we do need some regional specific information. We need to understand how it works in rotation, why it should be used, and what are the effects on follow-on crops, the use of it as a phytoremediator. And we'll talk about that in the next couple of slides. But I'll just go for the NZHIA's why. I wanted to compare two sort of data sets, really. With this, on the left, I referenced the MPI 2021 facilitating our industrial hemp industry. And they had an independent body come in and struggle with the question of how big is this industry? What could be the implications? What does it look like globally? How's it going to affect us? And they got a massive range of 11 to $774 million by 2030. So it was just, what assumptions are you going to use? And that's quite a big part of the question. They ended up with a prediction of scenario 2, they called it, and that was a $30 million industry by 2030. Now, in our publication, our scenario 2 was completely different. Now, of course, from my point of view, 20 odd years in the industry, I'm very enthusiastic about it, very bullish about it. That's got to be tempered because the rose-tinted glasses have to come off. We have to be realistic. We have to understand the risks and the rewards associated with it. But even with a basic understanding of their food industry, if we penetrated into that New Zealand market and that export market, and our fibre, the potential in the fibre industry and that construction space particularly to help us scale, we were predicting an easily sort of $400 or $500 million industry by 2030. Now, that was then compounded if you opened it up to that nutraceutical industry. And this is when we're talking about the nutraceutical, that's that health and wellness. And I'll talk about the spectrum because we've heard from Brian about high THC medicinal use of the product. Now, of course, we're low THC industrial hemp, but Brian also mentioned that they had a low THC version and that had a high content of CBD, which is all these cannabinoids that were running around. But I just do want to make sure that you understand that THC is a controlled drug, and that's what we're low in, hence the name low THC industrial hemp, and CBD is a prescription medicine. So in the sense of a regulatory environment, you're hit over the head by the Misuse of Drugs Act and the Medicines Act. So you just got to be a bit wary of that, and it'll come up in the conversation as we go through. But if we did have a regulatory environment that enabled an industry, we could get to that $2 billion quite quickly. Some of which doesn't require a whole lot of infrastructure because the infrastructure, as Kirsty's saying, exists in many cases, especially in regional New Zealand. But it's about the value chain. You know, we don't want to be a commodity. We don't drive tractors for a day in one direction across the Manitoba plains and turn around and come back. We can't compete with those people on a commodity basis. We've got to really go up that value chain. And that's what we were talking about, that New Zealand story, using that marketing, getting some New Zealand specific information. Does the hemp grown for seed in Hastings or in the grain belt in Ashburton, is there something different about it that we can market in a certain way? And then we can start using those geographic indicators. But that all needs research and development. And there's a huge amount of wide, just glaring gaps in our value chain, which need to be plugged by investors, plugged by people that are involved in those industries already, whether it be the food, the fibre, or those health and wellness industries. So there's just an amazing opportunity. And if we can get that collaboration working, if we can work together and understand some of these gaps and opportunities in the value chain, then we can help that scale. Because if we don't manage that scale properly, we won't be able to have a continuous supply to a manufacturer, so we'll let the manufacturer down. That's not going to help the industry develop. If we can't guarantee that farmer's got a market for the product that they're going to grow and process, then they're not going to want to be involved in the industry either. So it's got to work both ways, and we've got to respect the farmer as well. I mean, it's got to be economic for the farmer to do it, otherwise they're not going to do it. And they'll use it, they'll go off and do another alternate land use. But if we look at the why hemp on those four sort of corners, and we'll start with the farmer, and we got into a bit of this conversation with the phytoremediation aspects of into vine, into row cropping and vineyards. And that's a great opportunity because, from my point of view, you could build a whole industry just on the fact that this is good to grow in a farming rotation, because it's going to lift heavy metals and it's going to, break up compacted soils. So the cleaning and conditioning soils are really important, but where's the science to back that up? I mean, we've got, cadmium issues, we've got DDT, we've got lots of unproductive land that could be converted back into productive farmland for food production particularly. And this could all be done by using plants that are bioaccumulators. And in hemp's case, in a very short growing period, you could be growing 20 tonnes of wet biomass in a hectare. That's phenomenal. So if that could lift up some of these product chemicals and elements out of the soil and help us recondition it, then that's got to be a good thing. But again, we need the science. And that's a worldwide thing that we need to do. And how does it fit into that rotation? And we've just talked about a little about the cost of licenses. For an industrial hemp crop, because we don't have that risk of diversion, because we're not high THC, our license is $511. And yes, there's some compliance that you have to do as far as the application and an annual return. But if you do your annual return, you can get an extension on your license. You can do that twice. So you get 3 years out of a $511 license. Now, yes, there is a stipulation that you can't be within 5 kilometres of the school. But there's also in that same part of the regulations, it says at the discretion of the Director General. So they're going to say, they understand that rural New Zealand, there is a school close to farmland, but it doesn't preclude all the farmland around that school. The one about being not visible from the road, they're probably a little bit more serious about that because they don't want people stopping on state highways and jumping fences and things like that. So there are some things that they're a little bit hard and fast on, but generally they're up for a conversation about it, and they're really approachable. And given, it might even be visible from the road, but it goes down a deep gully and across a creek before we get to it. So those are all mitigating circumstances that they do have the discretion when they want to interpret in the favour and enable of the industry. Doesn't always happen, but it can do. But with the farming, it's just an amazing opportunity. And of course, I really needed to have a vineyard shot for Blenheim, but unfortunately we've got a beef and lamb farmer. But again, it's that rotation. How does it fit in? How does it complement those other primary industries that we have? And as we go through some of the next slides, we'll see that. I just want to put this one in here because we get an OIA, Official Information Act request every year to get the areas being grown in New Zealand. It's all done by DHB region, of course, because it's the Ministry of Health. You'll see in the second line down and third, about halfway down, Canterbury, South Canterbury. Those are the main growing areas. An interesting one would be your Hawke's Bay, where one year it's quite high, the next year it's quite low, and then it goes high again. And that's just a reflection on, hey, I've grown enough seed, I've got enough to produce my oil, and then the following year I'll grow some more. So those are the sorts of things that we need to understand, because if we don't understand that, you get a whole lot of farmers growing it, and then they're going to go, well, who's going to buy it? No one's going to buy it, and that farmer's not going to grow it again, and everybody's unhappy about the whole situation. But if we can really scale those industries around other areas, then you can see it really moving forward. And as we've been talking about, that phytoremediation opportunity in Blenheim particularly is of considerable interest. So why hemp for the food industry? Now, if you're growing for seed and you've got a license to grow low THC industrial hemp, you also will need, because you're growing for seed for human food, you'll need an MP1, which is National Program Stage 1. So that's a food control policy. So a little bit more compliance, but you need to be aware of it. If you're growing for seed, the big things about seed, especially when you make it into oil, is heat, light and air are the enemies of this product. You saw the mylar bags from Brian's presentation. You've got to be serious about the packaging of this product. You're going to harvest it when it's got a high moisture content. If you don't get that moisture out within hours, you'll have compost. So and a bitter seed makes a bitter seed product. And if you're selling a food product, it's got to be delicious. So you've got all these considerations. You've got to get it dry quickly after you harvest. Then you've got to, when you're processing into oil, in the absence of light and heat and air, and hence the nitrogen and flushing and that sort of thing. But if you pay attention to this, you can have a high quality product. And high quality products can then be given a great story about their provenance possibly as well in the marketing mix. But then you're going into global niche markets. And we're not a commodity competitor at that point. We're telling a great story about a wonderfully grown New Zealand seed oil product. And it'll be similar, and we can learn a lot from other industries, especially the wine industry. When they're going offshore, it's about quality. It's about consistent quality and telling that story. And there's a market for that, because these niche markets that are dotted around, and we're bearing in mind that there's quite a sophisticated hemp industry in a lot of these countries, even though we can't advertise it on Facebook and things like that. If we could get to those markets, they will support the New Zealand brand, because at the moment we do have that premium on that label, on that, New Zealand image that we all have the opportunity to use in the nation in a global sense in their marketing. The other thing that you should also be aware with, the law changed in 2018 to allow hemp seed for human consumption. Big news in the industry, allowed things to scale. The next thing that's happening is there's an application in front of Food Safety Australia and New Zealand that will allow for leaf and flower and sprouts and roots to be used as human food as well. Now, if that gets going, gets some momentum behind it, that could be another game changer, because that opens up that whole cannabinoid, terpene and flavonoid profile alongside the nutritional, healthy hemp seed oil, which has an amazing balance of all your essential fatty acids, but in a perfect ratio for human consumption, and it has all your amino acids. I mention these things because these are inherent qualities in industrial hemp that make it really special. So from a seed producing oil, those are really special qualities. Not every oil has every essential fatty acid or amino acid. This does. That's how the quality of this product is just so astounding, and that's why it should be of interest. And this is why we're doing the tour, to try and get those industry people, in this case the food industry, to have that light bulb moment and hear that fact and say, blimey, I've got to get this in my mix, whether it be an oil or the byproduct of the oil, because it, again, full plant utilisation. Nature doesn't make a mistake. We want to use all the parts of the plant. The economics stack up if we use all parts of the plant. Callaghan Innovation have just finished a white paper, which was co-funded by the Bioprocessing Alliance, around that waste, use of the waste streams from the industry, including the medical industry with the leaf and the flowering tops that they have access to, but also from the seed industry with the meal that comes out of the cold press, or the husks that come out of the dehulling process. So the food is an exciting thing, because healthy people obviously are going to have a big impact on, use of hospital equipment and things like that. So there's a whole lot of reasons why we want to be involved in that food industry. If we jump forward to the fibre industry, we've talked a little bit about the hempcrete, and again, healthy homes, healthy people, not having bronchitis, all those sort of things. that's going to relieve pressure on the health system. So this, again, is, these are unintended consequences, but they're available to us as an industry if we really got behind it. And I mentioned the housing and construction because it's a great example of how to scale the industry, because you could be in a massive demand. I mean, if you guys tried to buy Jib lately, it's a good example of resilient supply chains and how we could be doing a whole lot better in that space. Now, we've got this herd that could be made into this hempcrete material, and what does that leave us with from a waste stream? That's the bast fibre. So then you start talking about insulation materials, medium density fibre boards, all sorts of things, snip panels. They're all in the construction industry. Now, some of this is pretty low tech as well. So if we start then thinking about, well, what's the high tech stuff? 3D printing filaments, composite materials, plastics, the list is endless and it goes on and on. But again, why would you be interested, if you were an industry, in using industrial hemp fibre? So this is the reason why we're doing the tour, because we need people to understand that naturally it's antifungarial, antibacterial, antimicrobial, antistatic, stops 95% of the UV light. Now I'm starting to think, okay, well, if I'm a medical device manufacturer, maybe that's important for me. It's really strong and hard wearing, so maybe I should have my sheets in my hospitals out of it, because it's going to have all those qualities that a patient would enjoy, and it's going to last longer in that application of using it as bed linen. So what are you going to do with that knowledge? This is why we need industry to really hear some of these points, to really start going, bingo, I've got a light bulb moment. That's why I need to get it in my business plan. And it's those inherent qualities again, and I've just given you some in the fibre space, and we've already talked about the seed space. So if we jump forward to the next one, which is, of course, the health industry. And what we're talking about there is, again, food be thy medicine. So if we look at a spectrum of food, we go a little bit forward to that functional food. And these are mega trends that we're talking about. There's a lot of industry is about to invest big time in sustainability and raw materials that have these qualities. So they want things that are functional foods. If I not describe as a seed and nutritious seed oil, how functional that is, because it has those omega-3, 6 and 9, particularly the 3 and 6 in an appropriate balance for human consumption. So you've got functional foods, but as you go up through that, you go into dietary supplements, and then you're into natural health products, then you're into nutraceutical. And then at that point you stop, because there's a huge amount of health and wellness opportunity there in global export markets that are really looking for these products. And you haven't made a medical claim. So you haven't had to comply with the medical cannabis regulations, because it's a different set of regulations. And as Brian has, again, the mere fact that Brian can't talk about the medical qualities of this product just suggests how difficult it is to work in that space. But it's a reality, and the licenses are very expensive, and you've got to have clinical trials if you're going to make a medical claim. But if you don't make a medical claim, these people know that these products work. They know that rubbing hemp seed oil on has helped their kitty with eczema and things like that. Now, a lot of this is anecdotal. A lot of it you can't use in your marketing, because that would be considered a medical claim, and you would fall foul of that, and you would be, as a consequence, considered a medical company, and then the Ministry of Health would say, hey, your $500 license doesn't cut it anymore. We think you're a medical company. So again, there's a sort of, a bit of a role to play in this space. But what we're trying to do is say that that health and wellness market, including medical, with its own regulatory environment, is a huge opportunity for New Zealand. And regionally, there's places that it would suit. So if we look at a regional bias, why would we grow hemp for seed in Ashburton? Because we've got the infrastructure to dry it, we can combine it and all those sort of things. Why in Northland or Nelson or East Cape, where they have wonderfully long growing days, would you want to grow a female plant for that health and wellness industry? Because you can. And you don't have to then deal with pollen. So you have unpollinated female plants going into this health industry, which means you're not in conflict with the local grower that is growing medicinal and doesn't want to deal with your pollen. So you're understanding and taking into account what's already happening in some markets as well. And then you're looking at your regional capacities and strengths and playing to those. And you guys have got an amazing experience, and Nelson as well, Cawthron Institute, all the testing labs for your wine, that's all available to the hemp industry as well. These medicinal companies, sure, they're GMP facilities, so they're going to be a bit wary of allowing hemp starter material to come into their facilities, but it sets us up as a country to say a load of our products are going to be made in GMP facilities. A load of our products are going to have certification that's going to meet the requirements of the jurisdictions that we're going to be importing into, if not exceed. And that's another point of difference for us as a country. And then that breaks down again back to the regions. So very exciting opportunities. And that's the why of what we're doing this tour for. I just did want to acknowledge that as a registration, everybody that's gone online will be part of a draw for a hemp basket. If you didn't register online, if you could just jot down your email address on the pad here, that would be great. And we'll put you into that draw. And for anybody that's joining or rejoining the association during the tour, again, there'll be an opportunity to win a gift basket of Hark and Zander products, which we've all now tried and are clearly in love with, and are going to support that side of the industry as well. So a great opportunity there for some prizes. It also, there's a spot prize as well. So if you could just reach under your chair, and there'll be somebody with a post-it just right under the middle of the chair. And so it'll be a post-it. There we go. We have our winner. So if you could see me afterwards, because we have a gift bag of Pure Heart ATR. There's nothing untoward about that. And if you're available too, I'd love to take a photo, because then we can share it with the people that are you enjoying your project. Now, so the next steps, what can we do as part of the outcome of this tour? And we're working with the industry around a strategy reset, because as we talked about before, we've got a branding issue. We've got to change the narrative. There's lots of work that can be done in that space. But is the industry ready for that? Is the industry wanting to do some capability development and to agree on a strategy that, everybody's got their own business plans? That's great. And there's plenty of room in the industry for it. But there's some things that we could probably all agree on, like a Buy New Zealand brand or geographic indicators and things like that would help us all. And so we're hoping to get some dialogue happening with industry participants. I just want to acknowledge that white paper that I discussed, it's a Callahan Innovation. They've also got 3 roadmaps on their website about medicine, fibre and food. And they're great resources for people getting started in their hemp journey. And if you're also interested, Te Puni Kōkiri has some fact sheets on growing hemp as well, particularly for Māori landowners. So, because we have a huge role to play in this emerging industry. As from our point of view, we're going to try and use this information and weave it into a portal, an online community, and try and use that as a vehicle to get this collaboration happening. And that'll be the loosely called Aotearoa New Zealand Hemp Alliance. So we look forward to keeping you abreast of that after the tour's complete. So just a big thank you to the Marlborough Research Centre, not only for supporting us today and being the MC, thank you very much, and presenting, Gerald. It's been great to have you here, but also the support that you've given us in promoting the event. And, it's well worth saying that all the economic development agency I've been engaged with throughout the country, it's been positively received. Similarly with all this is a version of a town hall meeting. It's sort of a hybrid because it's sort of a university as well, or a centre of learning. So, but all the university meetings that we've been engaging with the R&D ecosystem within New Zealand, they've been really well received. The great thing about it is some of those universities, the CRIs, have come in to talk, and they're talking together now about the cannabis industry. So even they're starting to get excited about it. And it's not often that you get plant, food and ag research and everybody sort of agreeing that this is something of interest. So it's quite an interesting thing. And I just want to acknowledge our other speakers, Hark and Zander and Brian from Puro. So thank you, Kirsty and Brian. And a big thank you to AgMart who helped fund it. They've been wonderful for us as an industry. They've helped fund some summit speakers at our previous summits, and they've been very supportive of the industry and the NZHIA. So we couldn't have done this without their budget, and it just really made it happen. And spot prize winner for this afternoon is provided by Hemp NZ. And so I couldn't finish off without making encouraging you to join the association. As a registration person, you will get a bi-monthly newsletter that will keep you up to date with some information from the industry, but there's nothing quite like getting it, and a whole lot more from the resources available to NZHIA members. We have a $25 supporting or student membership, a $50 individual, and a $100 business. So it's not too arduous, and there's a lot of information that we can help with and really help you on building on that journey. So thank you very much for being here for today, and that's the conclusion of the presentation. So wonderful to have all your time.